Welcome to this particular podcast called When Mental Health and Sports Collide. And there's a lot to talk about, but we're going to break these segments down, these podcasts down into separate episodes. And I think you're going to get a lot. You're going to be able to learn a lot about this whole subject called When Mental Health and Sports Collide. And so I have a special guest here today, Kaleb. Kaleb plays football for Geneva College. He's a big Rams fan. I think over the years, Kaleb, we've seen a lot of mental health play out in sports. Can you think of anybody? Can you name anybody? I have a ton of athletes that I could go over and talk about, but can you think of anybody who's dealt with mental health or what you deem would be mental health in sports?
Yeah, I think the first person that comes to mind, which is really mostly speculated upon, is probably Antonio Brown for me. There's some possibility. He hasn't stated himself, so it's not like a fact that he stated. It's just speculation upon his injuries throughout his football career, where people really think that after that hit, something changed for him because he was like a completely different person.
Yeah. Well, we know football is a violent sport. It's obviously a full contact sport. So people are hitting each other, and the science that's out there shows very clearly that they're hitting each other at a velocity and at a rate that is similar to a car accident. And when someone gets hit and they get injured, it can cause a lot of problems for them. I remember a movie that was out there called Concussions. And it was a movie that Will Smith starred in. And all the credits at the end of the movie connected to this one doctor named Dr. Amen. Amen, like amen, but it's pronounced Amen. And he has a clinic and a couple of clinics all across the country. We visited the Reston, Virginia clinic, and he does a lot of work on CTE, and he's one of the forerunners there of CTE when it comes to diagnosing players and their injuries, and specifically brain injuries. And CTE occurs when a person has a concussion or multiple concussions, and it can take them down a path where they can have a lot of these mental health issues, and even worse, they can be homicidal, they could even be suicidal. And we see a lot of players in the NFL that have been diagnosed with that. But Dr. Amen says you could also have it in soccer. You could have it in really any contact sport. So football isn't necessarily the main sport that you can have CTE in. You could have CTE in any contact sport. So, but Amen goes down the path of really sharing that football is very dangerous, and he recommends that, hey, you probably shouldn't play football, but how are we going to stop that, right? It's part of our American culture now, just like baseball was way back in the day, even though baseball still is a part of our American culture. Football has been woven into our society, and CTE is a very serious thing. I can think of one great defensive player in my day that had CTE, and his name was Junior Seau, and he played for the Chargers before they moved to Los Angeles. I think the Rams and the Chargers, way back in the day, were LA teams, and then they moved out of there and it became the San Diego Chargers, and now the Chargers are back in LA. But Junior Seau was an incredible defensive player, and he had CTE, wound up committing suicide, and terrible. I think the whole nation was kind of mourning that loss, and It drove people down a deeper path. He wasn't one of the first players that was diagnosed with CTE. There's a lot of other players that were diagnosed with CTE. I can think of quarterbacks and running backs and again, all types of positions in football where people were diagnosed, and it's really caused them a lot of problems. Depression, anxiety. I mean, the depression and the anxiety are really deep with those that have CTE. They can become really, really depressed. They can exhibit signs of anxiety and even go down the path of exhibiting signs of some psychosis like paranoia. And it can lead them down the path of having, some very negative symptomology, and it can cause them to do some things that the average person who's never experienced that type of trauma, brain trauma specifically, it can really be unexplainable, or they can have a lack of understanding as to why that's occurring in a person. But it's because of that brain trauma, and CTE is what they've rubber stamped it with. And, that could cause some major mental health issues in the life of a person. Antonio Brown may have CTE, and he's undiagnosed. And that's why he's kind of running around doing a lot of these, things that, would rubber stamp him as being not a great example, right? Yeah. So, it's a big thing, mental health and sports, and that's why we're going down this path of, stating that mental health and sports can collide in a way that can be serious and can cause a lot of problems, not only with the individual who is experiencing mental health, but it can also have a trickle effect when it comes to our society today, because these players, these individuals are role models. I know Stephen A. Smith, I kind of heard him this weekend talking about how we rank players really high and hold them more accountable than we do politicians. And that's a true statement. I really liked what Stephen A. Smith had to say about that. But in all reality, these players are role models. And the reason why they're held more accountable is because they're more visible. We're watching them on a day-to-day basis. And when their mental health is not met in the proper way, and they're out of control in our society today, it really has this trickle effect with the average person, right?
Right. And now you have all that fantasy football and fantasy baseball, fantasy basketball. That probably puts a lot more pressure on these athletes, because they're now expected, oh, you're supposed to have this stat, you're supposed to have that stat, and then you'll be good. And then all these other people who aren't playing the sport or playing this fantasy football game, and they're like, oh, this person is terrible because he doesn't make enough fantasy points for me. I'm sure that also probably puts a lot of stress onto their life.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother dynamic, right? Stress, anxiety, right? Even trauma. People from the outside having undiagnosed or maybe even diagnosed mental health that are lashing out at players, and you see that whole world colliding. Right. I think that's an excellent point as well. And, as we dive into more of these podcasts, we're going to be breaking down a lot of mental health, what we see, and a lot of the athletes, and we're going to be, sharing some specific diagnoses as well as some symptomology as well. But some of the players that I can think of, and maybe when I call them out, maybe you can just share your little bit of knowledge about these particular players. Some of them might be even before your time, before you were born. But I'm going to shout some out here, and you kind of tell me what you know about them, if you've ever heard of them before. If you say no, that's okay. I'll fill in the blank. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Here's the first one. Len Bias.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him.
Len Bias was this incredible basketball player. He was supposed to be better than Michael Jordan.
Oh, wow.
Like off the chart better than Michael Jordan. And he had been selected by the Boston Celtics in 1986. So it was before you were born.
Yeah.
right?
Long
So
before I was born.
again, he was an
Not too
incredible
long.
basketball player. To be selected second overall is a feat in and amongst itself, you know. But Len Bias had a drug addiction, and he never made it. He never made it to his full potential in the NBA, and it was on the court when he passed away.
Oh man.
Yeah, of drug addiction. So, you know, that's a mental health situation all in and of itself, right? When we talk about drug addiction and mental health, I mean, both of them pretty much go hand in hand. And I don't think Len had people around him, or he ignored the people around him that were there to help him. So, you know, that was a tragic situation. I remember a lot of people really taking that death hard back in the 80s. So that was a tough one. Here's another one. Deion Sanders.
Yeah, I definitely heard of him.
Heard of Deion Sanders?
I heard that he had to go through lots of depression. I believe also like suicide. I think I read too.
Yeah. He had a lot of things going on, mental health wise, and in his specific book, and I have it right here. Power, Money, and Sex. He talks a lot about his symptomology and his mental health. And I would encourage anybody out there to pick up the book. You could probably get it on Amazon or some other outlets. But, you know, he talks a lot about his mental health and how fame made his mental health worse. And so
not that specifically, but how fame can really change a person and can bring out like kind of their like true character.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
Yeah, for sure. And it wasn't until he gave his life to Christ that Christ really helped him turn around that mental illness that he was experiencing, and God set him free. And he's been doing wonderful ever since. I mean, some people may say, what he did to Jackson State wasn't a good thing, but you know, I think he did a lot of wonderful work at Jackson State and really built that program to where it's at today, and did a wonderful job, and was an example of Christ in the midst of that impoverished area. But definitely Deion Sanders, a big name. Here's another one. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Tiger Woods.
Tiger Woods. He's a golf player.
Yeah. Is there much CTE in golf?
Not that I've heard of.
Not unless your wife starts hitting you with the golf club.
Oh.
Yeah, then maybe you might have some CTE. But that's kind of what happened in Tiger's life. And that incident where his wife was kind of hitting him with a golf club, it was because he was addicted to sex, and he was having sex with multiple people while he was married and had children. And so we can see the ramifications of mental health, how mental health can lead even to a reverse domestic violence situation. We typically think of domestic violence being between a man and a woman, and domestic violence being led by a man. But what about the reverse? It was actually, you know, Tiger's wife, now ex-wife, who had committed some domestic violence because she was infuriated that he was having affairs, and she didn't really know all about those affairs or all of the people that he was having contact with. So again, that's another level of mental health. I mean, you could probably put that under bipolar disorder. I don't know if Tiger Woods has ever been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but when I was going through my sports counseling certificate through California University of Pennsylvania, I did my main paper on Tiger Woods. A lot of other people did too. And that kind of dates back to when I got my certificate. But a lot of people were using him as an example. And how would you counsel Tiger Woods to get back on his feet and get back into his sport and be the best that he can be after experiencing what he experienced, right? Either whether it was driven by bipolar disorder, and that's the reason he had all those affairs, and then he wound up being violently attacked by his wife, and then going down the path of getting into an accident, overdosing on drugs, and possibly losing a leg, or the loss of mobility in a leg because of the accident. I mean, there was just so much to write about for that sports counseling certificate. And we went down the path of creating a plan how we could help Tiger bounce back and be the best golfer that he could be. So, again, another example of when mental health and sports collide, right? In a very negative way. But we're seeing this thread, and going back to Dion, that thread of fame, money, right? Power.
Right.
It really can take a person and cause them to be out of control, and they can lose sight of the fact that they need to take care of their mental health, right?
Right.
And they need to make sure that they're going down this path of not only taking care of themselves, but their family and others around them, right?
Right.
Here's another example for you. Trevor Bauer.
I read a bit about him. I know he's a Dodgers baseball pitcher, I believe. And he got in the mix of accusations of like sexual abuse.
Yeah, there was some kind of domestic violence, sexual abuse. There was something that he was accused of there, and he was suspended by the Dodgers, and it was the longest suspension outside of Pete Rose, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've probably never heard of Pete Rose,
No, I
right? But Pete Rose was suspended from baseball due to a gambling addiction. And, it was stated that he was gambling on the games, and so he was losing games on purpose, but then he denied that he was gambling on losses. He said he would always gamble on himself, and he thought he would win. And, there's lots of rumors and speculation that's out there based on some things that he stated. I don't know everything that has been said over time, but baseball banned Pete Rose for life.
Oh, wow.
And he can't, participate in baseball. He can't coach baseball. He can't do any of that at the major league level. And man, they really cracked down on him hard. But how many people do you think are gambling on the game now?
I think a lot.
A lot. But that's a conspiracy theory. But you can see even an addiction of gambling, right? So we've gone down this path of saying the addiction to sex, the addiction of drugs, the addiction of money, of wealth, gambling, right? Man, just a ton of things that you can name there, right? Mm-hmm. Drug addiction, alcohol addiction. I mean, almost every one of our greatest heroes and athletes have been bombarded by one or all of those areas, what I would deem as mental health. In the Christian world, we would probably call that sin, that they're struggling with sin. Mm-hmm. But, I definitely think that some things can affect us mentally, and we can go down a place where we're not acting like ourselves. We're not behaving like ourselves, and we need to treat, and we need to make sure that we're accountable. I think in every one of these situations that we talked about, Tiger Woods, Len Bias, right? All these players, Pete Rose, Trevor Bauer, all of those individuals have displayed a level where they're not accountable. So, I think, as we go down some of these segments, we're going to talk about more. We're going to have lots of other people that we discuss, and maybe even Michael Jordan. That would be an interesting one to talk about, right? The gambling addiction there that's been reported. And again, he might say, well, I never gambled on money that I didn't have, but that doesn't matter. It's still a gambling addiction. And that can affect a person's life, and it can also influence a lot of others. And we're seeing now through fantasy sports and the gambling side of fantasy sports of how much of an issue that is in our society. Yeah. People are addicted. Definitely. And they can lose a lot of money And people can say, well, there's no difference between that and the stock market, no difference between that and cyber currency. Well, again, it's all one and the same, right? Different methods, but when you boil it down to the centralized focus of what it really is, it's really a gamble, and it can be an addictive thing and not a healthy thing, right? Then there's some offshoots, right? One player with the Buffalo Bills that just recently, Damar Hamlin. Yeah, talk to me about that. You're studying nursing, so that had to be a very intriguing situation there.
Yeah, most definitely. It's all interesting. So basically, the doctors right now they're thinking it's commotio cordis. Basically, the symptoms of that, which line up very closely, is collapse immediately after getting hit at the chest, ventricular fibrillation, which basically is just the heart is beating irregularly. It doesn't have that regular beat to it.
Yeah.
Then cardiac arrest, and then also unconsciousness. That lined up very closely. What's interesting about it all is that you have to have a 90-degree hit right on the heart, right in between the two beats of the heart. So that's what they're speculating that Damar Hamlin went through, which is very interesting. And I'm sure that has a toll on Damar Hamlin's mental health after getting an injury like that.
Injuries can definitely affect your sport, and it can cause you to really go in a downward spiral if you don't have the help around you. And you're not listening to that help, you're not accountable to that help, so that you can progress and continue to move forward, either as a player or a person. But yeah, sports counseling is definitely something that we use a lot with players, and I've been able to counsel some Major League Baseball players in our area, and I've been able to go down the path of counseling all the way down to the high school level. And that would include high school, college, and professional. I've counseled a couple of college players as well, and all of them have suffered with different things like concussions, CTE, depression, anxiety, sports injuries, and so they've had a very difficult time going back and participating in their sport, like you were saying, because they're constantly bombarded by that thought: what if this happens again? Right. What if I go down this path and I'm not able to do it at the pace or at the the full force that I was doing it before. And so that goes with ACL injuries, right? MCL injuries, all those types of broken bones, and feet and legs and arms, and it's all a situation where it can play really hard on someone's mental health. And you're having to kind of walk them through in the counseling process to get them to have this exposure back to the sport, right? And so we call that exposure therapy. And the more they can put themselves out there and participate and work through it, either on the field of play or through exercise, they then have that fighting chance to bounce that mental health back up and be able to, participate in the things that they love. But then there's other players that can't ever get back. I think one of those in your lifetime was a quarterback. His first name was Alex. He played for San Francisco and then wound up going to Kansas City and then went to the Redskins, and he broke his leg really bad. Do you remember Alex?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember his last name? Is your mind spinning there? His last name was Smith, Alex Smith. And so he he broke his leg with the Redskins so severely that he had to rehab that leg, but he could never get back to the level that he once was. But he did get on the field after he broke his leg.
Last year, right?
Played for the Redskins again and was able to overcome a lot of mental health struggles. And then that satisfied him that he was able to get back on the field after he rehabbed from that broken leg, which if you saw pictures of it, I know ESPN did an E60, documentary. If you saw that leg, you'd be like, wow, that's a wild injury there. And I don't know how anybody could come back from it, but he did. And he did it successfully. And he's now satisfied. I think he's doing interviews now, and he's on TV, and he's working on that broadcasting career. And I don't know where he's going to take it, but again, he was able to overcome that mental health challenge, right, from a sports injury, and he did it successfully. Well, Kaleb, I want to thank you for being on the show. Is this interesting?
It was very interesting. I enjoyed it a lot.
And so when you come back on again, we'll be breaking down some of these things more specifically, maybe honing in on one player. I know what our producer, Donnie Shields, is going to say. He's going to come out and say, narrow this down, really spotlight, maybe one player and just break down that one player. And that's probably what we'll do. So, get your thinking cap on, and we'll have you on the show again. And we'll be inviting some other people on the show to talk about, when mental health and sports collide. Hey, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again. Thanks for watching Speak Hope Now, and you can watch all of our content on the Roku channel. Just search Resurgent Life, check out our logo, and you can see all the content there. We hope to see you soon.